In 1885, a young German psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus did something few scientists had ever attempted. Instead of studying other people, he decided to study his own memory. Day after day, he memorized thousands of meaningless combinations of letters, strings like B-O-K, Y-A-T, and D-A-X. They weren't words. They carried no meaning and no emotional connection. Then, he carefully recorded how much he remembered over time. The results were astonishing. He discovered that memory fades much faster than most people realize. Within just a short time, much of what we learn begins to disappear unless we actively strengthen it. More than a century later, students around the world still face the same challenge. Hours spent highlighting textbooks, rereading notes, and cramming the night before an exam often create the feeling of learning, but only a fraction of that information survives days later. So why does the brain forget so easily? And more importantly, how can we make it remember? To answer those questions, we first need to understand what happens inside the brain when we learn something new. Imagine you're learning how the human immune system works. The moment you're introduced to the concept, groups of neurons begin communicating with one another, creating a new memory. At first, those connections are weak and unstable. If you never revisit the information, many of those neural connections gradually weaken, making the memory difficult or impossible to retrieve. But every time you actively use that information, those same neural pathways fire again. With repeated activation, the connections become stronger and more efficient. Over time, the memory becomes part of your long-term knowledge instead of a short-lived experience. Interestingly, this process continues even after you stop studying. While you rest, and especially while you sleep, your brain organizes new memories, connects them to things you already know, and strengthens important information for future recall. Knowing this changes the way we should study. The first technique is called active recall. Instead of reading your notes again and again, close the book and challenge yourself to remember the information without looking. Ask yourself questions. Use flashcards. Explain the topic out loud as if you're teaching someone else. The goal isn't to recognize the answer. The goal is to retrieve it. That small difference has a huge impact. Every successful retrieval tells your brain that this information is important and worth keeping. Even when you can't remember the answer, you're still learning. The effort of searching your memory prepares your brain to absorb the correct information much more effectively once you see it. The second technique is known as interleaving. Most people study one subject for a long time before moving to another. It feels comfortable because your brain stays focused on a single topic. But research suggests there's a better approach. Instead of spending 2 hours only on biology, try alternating between biology, chemistry, and mathematics. Switching topics forces your brain to repeatedly adapt and retrieve different types of information. Although it feels slightly more difficult, that challenge strengthens memory and improves your ability to distinguish similar ideas instead of confusing them. Your brain becomes better at deciding not only what the correct answer is, but also why it's correct. Finally, there's spaced repetition. Imagine trying to build muscle by exercising for 10 straight hours in one day, then never exercising again for a month. Most people know that wouldn't produce lasting results. Learning works in much the same way. A single marathon study session may help you remember information for tomorrow's quiz, but much of it disappears soon afterward. Instead, divide your study time across several days or weeks. Each review reminds your brain that the information is still important. Between those sessions, your brain continues strengthening the memory, especially during sleep. This gradual process is far more effective than trying to force everything into your memory at the last minute. One surprising truth connects all three of these techniques. None of them make studying feel easier. In fact, they often make studying feel harder. Retrieving answers from memory, switching between subjects, and returning to material days later all require more mental effort than simply reading the same page again. But that extra effort is exactly what makes learning stronger. Real learning doesn't happen when information feels familiar. It happens when your brain is challenged to rebuild, reconnect, and strengthen what it knows. The next time you sit down to study, don't just spend more time. Spend your time differently. Test yourself instead of simply rereading. Mix subjects instead of mastering only one at a time. Review information across multiple days instead of saving everything for the night before. Your brain has been refining memories this way for millions of years. The more your study habits match the way your brain naturally learns, the less you'll struggle to remember, and the more you'll understand long after the exam is over.